From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a WisPolitics Capital Chats episode brought to you by Spectrum. Today, I'm joined in the office in Madison by my colleague, Kate Morton, to talk about an interview she just did with Representative Shelia Stubbs. She is a Democrat from Madison. So, Kate, what did you and Representative Stubbs get to talk about?
Yeah, Adam, we talked about a new bill she has to create a task force on missing and murdered African American women and girls. We talked about this bill that she introduced last session to create the task force, which she said didn't have as much bipartisan support, but she said this time around she's seeing a lot of support from both sides of the aisle.
That definitely sounds like an interesting topic, so let's just jump right into it.
All right, Representative Stubbs, thank you for joining me for the podcast today. I just want to get us off started. We're going to talk a little bit about a bill you've introduced to start a missing and murdered African American women and girls task force. So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, first and foremost, thank you, Kate, so much for this interview. My top line is we need to dedicate resources and efforts to directly combat gendered violence in the African American community, because I believe Black women and girls deserve to grow up in Wisconsin, a place that is safe for them and their families. But more importantly, let's talk about the numbers. Black women and girls doubled the homicide rate in the country. And the rate of homicide of Black women and girls in 2019 was 10.1 out of 100,000. But the rate in 2020 doubled the homicide rate for Black women and girls to 20.2 out of 100,000. And so those numbers are staggering. Even more, there are 90,333 Black women and girls that were murdered. That represented 33.5% of murdered women. And so for people who are still trying to understand what those numbers mean, here's a very simple figure. 5 Black women were killed every day. That is staggering. That is so unacceptable. And so, I think it's time that we in the state of Wisconsin focus on African American women and girls. And I believe in creating this task force is one way to directly impact what's happening in the state of Wisconsin. And I also want to let listeners know that the state of Wisconsin, we have the highest homicide rate. It was in 2020. So it's really important that we be a leader in this work. Minnesota has already done this work. I want to thank Representative Richards, who began this work. They are ahead of us in Wisconsin, but it's still work that we need to do. So I'm looking forward to getting this task force up and going with the creation of the 19 members.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, the speaker recently formed a couple different task forces. Was this task force something you had proposed to him in the past? And where do you think your Republican colleagues stand on this as a proposal?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. Actually, I introduced this bill last session. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. It was the end of the session. So the bill was introduced. It was not bipartisan. I worked extremely hard this session, talking to many of my colleagues about that. And I'm honored to actually share with you that this bill, this session is bipartisan. I'm very honored to have my colleague in the Assembly, Representative Michael Schraw, join me. And in the Senate, the lead author, Senator Jesse James, and Senator LaTanya Johnson. I consider us a dream team. If we're going to get this work done, you have the most educated, sophisticated individuals that know a lot about this topic that I think will really change the dynamics. But I think also, I've talked with the governor, I've talked with the attorney general, I've talked with the lieutenant governor, I've talked with the speaker. It's time. If we're going to do it, the time it's now. I want this up and going. I've been very clear about those conversations, and I believe, people are going to support me. This legislation is very bipartisan. In fact, last week when I was in session having lunch in our parlor, 2 of my colleagues that were Republicans said, please sign me on to that bill. Even over the weekend, we're starting to get even more people. So it is a very piece of bipartisan legislation, because I really believe our colleagues understand that. I look forward to having Speaker Voss assign this legislation to a committee. I am ready, community's ready to get this really important conversation up and going. And while we're talking about that, I want you to remember that I was also the co-chair of the Speaker's Task Force on Racial Disparities. And at that time, I had a chance to talk with Speaker Voss about disparities in the state of Wisconsin. So I look forward to seeing us roll out this legislation like we did the Speaker's Task Force. At that work, we had 18 bills that were created, 9 became law. And so I'm looking forward to seeing this creation become law as well.
Yeah, maybe you could say a little bit more about the status of this issue in Wisconsin. Is there being enough done to protect African American women and girls? And what do you think can be done to address this problem?
Absolutely. I think it's really critical what this task force done. And before I go a little bit deeper there, I just want to tell you who's in this task force, because I've been asked by so many people, like, is it going to be, a task force? We're just going to pass the report and put it on a bookshelf, or you're going to get things done. I've been known all my career to get things done, a change agent, someone who believes in the work. So this member is a 19-member task force. It's comprised of 4 legislators, so 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans from both houses, 3 representatives from the law enforcement entity, 4 legal experts, being Wisconsin District Attorneys Association, U.S. Attorney's Office, a judge or an attorney that works in juvenile court, a county coroner or DHS representative. And for law enforcement, it's the Badger State Sheriff, Wisconsin's Chief of Police, and the Department of Criminal Justice Investigation Division, which is the Attorney General's office. 2 experts in the field of gender violence, Wisconsin Coalition Against Sexual Assault and Domestic Abuse, Wisconsin. We're asking for representatives there. An organization that directly aids Black female victims. So an organization that provides legal services to Black female victims, an organization that does not provide legal services for Black women and girls, and then an organization that provides advocacy or counseling for Black female victims. And most important, what's going to really make this task force so critical with the makeup is 3 representatives that are Black female survivors or gendered violence experience. So having people with lived experience on this task force gives us a different, robust look as to what's really transpired to happen. So I'm really excited about the makeup of this task force. There are duties that need to happen. What specifically would this task force do? We're going to look at systemic causes of violence in the African American community. What's happening within the girls? What are they experiencing? What are the appropriate methods of tracking and collecting data? Violence against the African American women and girls. What's missing? What's been really hard, I think, when you ask any criminal justice partner or anyone else when they're looking at the field, is getting accurate data. With the data, we want to look at policies and institutions such as policing and child welfare, coroner practices, other governmental practices. What's happening that's creating this violence against the African American women and girls. We want to measure and address and reduce violence against African American women and girls. I want to know what's happening and how can we help. But I think what's even more important is to measure how we can help victims, how we can help victims' families, how we can help victims in the community prevent and heal from this violence that occurs. So I'm really, really excited to take a victim stance in a scope, to look at those that have been survivors, and to look at our system, our holistic criminal justice system, and bring some of the best and brightest individuals to the table in the state capitol and really begin to address this issue.
Okay, well, we know how big of an issue this is nationally. What is your sense of this issue in the state of Wisconsin?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question. In the state of Wisconsin, there are families, unfortunately, that are victims to missing and murdered African American women and girls. I just had an interview on Saturday with a family with a news channel who shared with me about a family who's experiencing that right now, whose mom just supported my legislation. So I'm looking forward to really speaking to the victims' families and giving them a chance to come in this Capitol and share their experiences. I think there are a lot of people that come in this space, but I think opening up this opportunity to African American women and girls who are victims or who have witnessed what's happened in a community, how do we heal, is critical, because this is not just a bill number. these are individual lives that have been impacted, that there's a void, that it would never be the same. So I want to shed the light upon this really important issue nationally and really focus on the state of Wisconsin. We know Wisconsin is the worst state to raise a Black family. We have the worst disparities from birth to death. We know Milwaukee is the most segregated city. We know in Dane County that we have the highest child poverty rate. We know Wisconsin has the highest infant mortality and morbidity rate. We know that we have the highest child in adult juvenile delinquency. We have housing issues. We have economic development issues. It's hard, but there are families who choose to make Wisconsin their home, like I have. And so I want to continue to address each disparity one by one. And I think collectively, as we do that, we'll begin to reduce those disparities, and we'll make sure that families that want to make Wisconsin their home are allowed to.
Well, thank you so much, Representative Stubbs, for joining me for the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your coverage. And please continue to keep in contact with me as we get more information.
All right, Kate, thanks for bringing us that interview with Representative Stubbs. It was a pleasure to have her on and have you interview her. If our listeners want to read more about the task force and any of the other special speakers task forces set up recently, they can head over to our website at wispolitics.com. But for now, I'm Adam Kelnhofer.
I'm Kate Morton.
Thanks for tuning in to WisPolitics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.